Hi, everybody. I'm Peter Schwartz. I'm the director of the IU Center for Bioethics, and I'm here to welcome you to today's talk in the IU Bioethics Grand Round series and jointly hosted in this beautiful Regenstrief space by the Regenstrief Institute. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today, Peter Ubel, who is the Madge and Dennis McLawhorn University Professor of Business, Public Policy, and Medicine at Duke University. Dr. Ubel is a physician and researcher whose writing and research explores decision-making, policy, and medical ethics in a range of areas. You may have seen him about 2 months ago in the New England Journal writing about informing patients about the cost of their medicines and including that in decision-making and also controlling cost for medicines that are on accelerated approval. Again, really important type of comments that he makes in the policy and ethics world that directly affects medicine. Dr. Ubel publishes in leading medical journals, such as the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA Internal Medicine, American Journal of Bioethics, and Academic Medicine, and that's all in the last 12 months. He has published over 350 papers and 5 books. And I would stop there, but I'll mention also, I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Ubel when I was a medical student, and he had just written a paper then, which I still teach, called What Should I Do, Doc?, about how to talk to patients about decision-making, especially in this world of thinking of decision-making and quality of decision-making in light of these advances in behavioral economics. How do you evaluate what patients are thinking and doing and try to improve that now that we understand decision-making in this new way? And he inspired me in that area, and he's inspired many students and young faculty and postdoctoral fellows in that area. And I guess that's probably the highest praise I can give him in this introduction. Dr. Ubel.
Thanks. Yeah, so I totally want this to be interactive. And if I feel like the interaction is slowing us down too much, I'll just be obnoxious and push us forward. But I'm really trying to think through some stuff. This is not a psychotherapy session. It could turn into one. But I really want to hear your thoughts and reactions. I also want to make sure I'm making myself clear because this is a different take on some stuff that I've done. So I haven't presented this in this way, but I'll just to show you what I'm going to talk about and how I got here. Imagine these are the kinds of questions that a lot of healthcare businesses face. Should our group of dermatologists, I'm nearing retirement, sell our practice to a private equity group, and under what situation, under what circumstances, what are the conditions? Should the hospital I work at, I understand that this is a very 18 hospital system. Is that what it is, the Indiana one? That's not for efficiencies of scale, people. A lot of times it's for efficiencies of negotiation. So a lot of hospitals are thinking, do I buy this other hospital or do we all merge together so that when we go to the insurance company, they can't walk away from the negotiation. They need us more than we need them. And then we can get higher prices. So that's a thing a lot of hospitals, including nonprofits, do. Should a clinical organization like Indiana Health or Duke Health or something, should they work with a debt collection agency when their patients can't pay the bills? And what do they need to understand about the terms of that debt collection? Should a pharmaceutical company like, I don't know, Lilly, should they charge what the price that will maximize their profits the most or not? So that's the range of the kind of questions that I won't answer today, but those are the kind of things I want to start thinking through. How do we even answer these questions? And and should pharmaceutical benefit management companies like Express Scripts, when they negotiate a discount from Lilly, how much of that should they pass on to patients versus payers versus themselves? Should they even make it public what they negotiated, et cetera? So these are, I think, really important business questions and really important ethical questions. I have long been interested in the intersection of economics and ethics of healthcare, but it's mainly from this perspective of a clinician. When I was in residency, I did a cardiology rotation with the chair of medicine at Mayo Clinic where I was training. And Mayo is has a very good payer mix. They tend to have well-insured patients, and they do quite well. And here was the guy who was running the Department of Medicine. At the time, there were 2 drugs available when someone was having a heart attack to kind of dissolve the clot. And one of them was 10 times more expensive than the other, and maybe 1% better at opening up that clot. And I remember the chair of medicine saying to me, I don't think that's worth it. And he prescribed the less expensive drug. And I thought, wow, should a physician be making that decision or not? So those are the kind of ethical, economic, I think yes, but I thought it was really important in a question about economics and ethics, but one that like an individual clinician might face. Should clinicians consider the cost of care when taking care of their patients? Should they ration care from their patients, whatever rationing means? Should they discuss cost of care with patients? Things like that. That's stuff I've been obsessing over for years. But now for the last 15 years, I've been at Duke University, and I'm one of the things I do is I teach business students who are going to work in some part of healthcare. The vast majority of them are not clinicians. They used to be, most of them went into pharma and biotech, but now they're going to consulting and IT, device manufacturers. They're kind of spread all over. And I'd always try to use stealthics in my teaching. So it's stealth ethics. I would throw in, remind them that, yeah, they're going to business school. They're going to want to get a really high paying job when they're done. But they're doing that within a context where we are trying to help people at some of the most important times in their life, when they have very little choice about whether to be a consumer or not, and when they don't understand the choices they're making and the government is paying for the care that they get. And I try to remind them, this is your mission. And so you want to do well by doing good, but think about how well and how much of the good you're going to sacrifice to do well financially. So I've been thinking about that, and I've been teaching these students, but I hadn't ever thought, okay, but what does it actually mean for what a pharmaceutical company should do when thinking about profits? So that's what I'm going to talk about. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend I'm Milton Friedman for a little while. Milton Friedman was a Nobel Prize winning economist, University of Chicago, kind of the guru, free market guru here in the United States. And still influential in what I think a lot of business students are taught about corporate responsibility. And so it's not always about business ethics. Sometimes it's corporate responsibility. I think there's a ton of overlap. But he had this pretty strong view that that for-profit shareholder-owned companies have a primary responsibility to maximize shareholder value. That's different than maximizing profits, but I'm probably going to use those interchangeably and sloppily. But shareholder value, long-term value of shareholders, the return on their investment. They are the owners of the company. You are working for them, and your job is to maximize their value. So that was what he thought. And it's long-term, and you can't break the law in doing it. And he even said you had to pay attention to ethical norms. Didn't go into super rigorous detail about that, but I'll go into a little bit more later. But this is still what I think a lot of people, when they come out of business school, they think, in fact, there's law that says that there's legal duty to promote shareholder value, and that's debated. I'm not a legal expert, but I think a lot of people come out of business school believing, or quote, knowing, that their job is to maximize shareholder value. That is, in fact, a duty that they've got. And with that duty, that takes away a lot of moral questioning, right? Like, I'm charging a lot of money for that new cancer drug. Is that okay? Oh, yeah, maximize shareholder value. So it's a nice, easy shortcut to get to doing things. Yep. Now, so this sounds like a kind of a silly view of corporate responsibility, like they only care about shareholders. There's a whole nother set of thinkers that I've barely begun scratching the surface of that promote what they call stakeholder value. And they're saying that, yeah, companies shouldn't just think about shareholders, they should think about other stakeholders. Like, what are the other stakeholders that a company might think about? Just curious, just off the top of your head, what comes to mind? I mean, employees, yeah, like, so you're going to help your shareholders and screw the employees, is that right? even if you can get away with it. So that's one group. Yeah. Anyone else? Nick? Customers. And of course, you want to benefit customers to the extent it gives you more customers and higher profits. But the question is, would you ever sacrifice the shareholder value to help your customers? That's that, and the Friedman would say no, and the stakeholder people would say yes. Other stakeholders that come to mind? Community, yeah. So like dirtying the water, like helping with invest in parks, local parks, doing whatever, right? So maybe you think of the community. Yeah, so that's right. So within the company, you've got employees, managers, owners, those are people. But outside of it, you're thinking about the people that supply you. You want to treat them well and think about ethical duty to them, society, shareholders, customers, et cetera. So all that is what stakeholder theory says. Dude, if you're running a company, don't just think about profits and shareholders. Think about these other entities that you owe something to. And that when you're making these difficult decisions, that should be weighed into it. I'm gonna basically put stakeholder theory aside. For now, I'm gonna pretend that it's not the right way to go, and I'm gonna take a much more of a Friedman view. Like, no, really, we're gonna maximize shareholder value, but even if under that, would that still set limits on what a company should do? And I'm going to argue yes. And so that's where we're going to go. Yeah. It's long term is what Friedman was obsessed with. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, and that would bug him. And you can always say, well, how long of a term, right? And then like under stakeholder theory, people talk about maybe future generations as one of your stakeholders too. And then people debate about what would that mean and how far into the future can you see? But yeah, long term is what Friedman would care about. And so certainly all the incentives where you give a CEO a huge bonus if the price goes up a certain amount, you can do all kinds of stuff to jump up the stock price, and then you get your goal. You leave the company with a huge bonus and all that, and then they tank. That is bad to him. All right, so if you're thinking of the ethical duties of healthcare companies, I would start with, well, what are the ethical duties of healthcare practitioners? And I'm a physician, so I think like, what do physicians say? And there's a long stated ethic within medical profession to put patient interests ahead of your own. It goes back to Plato, who, as we talked about earlier today, he's usually wrong, but very entertainingly so. The business of a physician is not to make money for him or herself, but to pursue what's good and proper for patients. AMA Code of Ethics says this: physicians have an ethical responsibility to place patients' welfare above their own self-interest. I'm not saying this is what physicians do, but at least the profession says that's what physicians ought to do. And so you'd think, oh, well, if physicians ought to put patient interests ahead of their own, should healthcare companies act the same way? That's what we're going to get to, right? What about hospitals? So in the United States, hospitals started off as charitable institutions. They didn't charge anything for their services. That started changing around the probably 1920s or something, around that era. There are still a lot of nonprofit hospitals in the United States. I expect the Indiana hospital system is nonprofit. Nonprofit does not mean non-lucrative. It doesn't mean that people don't get paid very well, but it generally comes with tax breaks, and those tax breaks are tied to the fact that they're supposed to be thinking about community benefit. So so you'd think that, again, that suggests healthcare is different than a t-shirt company that should just maximize profits and not worry about anything else. But this is the American Hospital Association Code of Ethics. It turns out, there's a long tradition of charitable care in the American hospital industry, but I reached out to the president of the HA because I couldn't find it online, and he said there's a reason. And this is really disturbing to me. And like when I looked into private equity acquisition, that question I put out earlier about should you sell your practice to private equity, I started going on to American College of Cardiology, American College of Dermatology, Academy of Dermatology, all the different professional organizations, especially the ones that were frequently selling their practices off to private equity, to look for ethical guidance, and found almost none. So this is a problematic thing. We don't really think much about business ethics in healthcare. We think about medical ethics, like what the clinician should do or not do. We don't think about the ethics of the business of healthcare. And I think, and the American Hospital Association has in fact actively avoided taking stances on these kind of things. That disturbs me. That just shows like we got some work to do. So my questions are, whose interests are healthcare organizations responsible to promote? And I'm going to think about that in terms of clinical organizations, from a 4-person family practice clinic to a huge health system like Indiana's got, payers, insurance companies, device companies, pharma, drug companies. Just think about, I want to think about all these entities, and I'm not going to answer the question for any of them. But I don't want to just narrow down to clinical organizations, the ones that provide direct clinical care, because I think healthcare is different in important ways that should affect what we think of if we're making a pacemaker. We're not the one implanting the pacemaker. So that's what I'm going to explore. I'm going to talk a little bit about this Milton Friedman's take on what we should or shouldn't do. I'm going to look at how that, if we accepted that theory, how that would apply to different kinds of healthcare organizations. And then I'm going to do a really crappy job of thinking about what that means for what corporations ought to do. So questions on this before I go forward? Lost most of you already, your interest. That's great. Okay, cool. Here's Milton Friedman. There are no-nos for companies. And the no-nos include, don't overpay your employees. Overpaying means you could have maximized value to shareholders more by paying them less. And so you might be being nice by giving them a working wage, but if you didn't have to, you hurt your shareholders. And that would be a no-no to him. He doesn't think it's the job of the company to set what the wages ought to be. They should work to maximize their shareholder value. And now, if it turns out paying employees more gets you better employees and retains them, so you have to keep retraining new people, then do it. But you're not doing it because of the moral duty to the employee. You're doing it because it maximizes shareholder value. Same thing for the price of products. It'd be so nice if I could make it more affordable for people to buy this drug. That's really noble of you, Friedman would say. But if you can make higher profits by charging more, you should. And so if by lowering the price you get more customers and get more profits, great. But that's your reason for lowering the prices. In both cases, it's really you're just thinking about profit / shareholder value, and that's you want to treat employees well. There's no reason to treat them unethically and be mean to them, but there's no reason to be overly generous either. Another note on that would be charitable giving. For the most part, he says, why are companies giving money to charity? They don't have a competitive advantage in doing that. Unless you're Coca-Cola and you're putting money into like clean water because you understand water better than most companies because it's your business, maybe that's good. But for the most part, you should just pay out your return to your shareholders, and your shareholders can give money to whatever charities they want to give to. That's more efficient to him. So he doesn't like the idea of companies doing a whole lot of charitable giving. Now, if charitable giving is well publicized and gets you better PR and gets you better return, that's fine. But you don't do it out of the goodness of your heart, or you shouldn't. He thinks that's just not a smart thing for a company to do. Questions on any of this? You're all on board with this view of the world? Yeah, you agree with this, right? No? Yeah.
Or a microphone expert. But this does seem like very convenient moral reasoning that supports the interests of the company at the expense of, well, going back to the stakeholders. So, yeah, it just seems like a convenient set of assumptions that are serving a vested set of interests. Is that common critique of these?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of critiques of Friedman's view. I think his main take on it is not that this is some kind of justification for greedy behavior, but instead he wants to promote efficient markets. And his sense is any way in which a company overpays or underprices or gives a whole bunch of money away to charity, the money could have reinvested in itself to like get newer equipment, to develop new products and everything. That's going to ultimately harm more people because he was such a believer in the good things that come out of efficient markets. And so it really is that's where a lot of it comes from. Now, it turns out when you go to business school and hear this, it's a wonderful excuse to go do whatever you can to maximize, your profits. And there's so many incentives that are already pushed that way anyway. Like, how are you going to get promoted? You're the one who landed the big new contract, or you helped the team figure out they could charge this much more for that cancer drug than they thought they could charge, and it turned out well. And you're going to move up. So there are all kinds of incentives and this, now you don't have an ethical thing pulling back on it, is what I think. That's what concerns me. And so I'm going to get to why I think just going like, I only care, if I'm Milton Friedman, I care about efficient markets. This is what I'm going to ultimately say is healthcare is so far from having a potential to be an efficient market. You got to stop justifying all this crappy behavior through this stuff. And that's really where I'm going to go. I just think healthcare is not, it's just such a distorted market, appropriately so, and unavoidably so, that you don't have the moral license to do some of the stuff you do if you're selling cell phones. That's where I'm going to go. Yeah, other questions or thoughts on this before? And if you say something, and I'll repeat it so that the audience online can hear. Yeah. Yeah.
I was involved in a program in Kenya, and I invited a friend of mine who just happened to be the president of Pfizer Oncology to come there.
Mm-hmm.
He got turned on, but he saw. He went back and he got he got 3 or 4 other companies to donate essentially millions of dollars to develop the first cancer program for serving 30 million people in Kenya. Okay, I asked him, why would you do that? And he says there are 1 billion people who live in Africa, and we're selling no products to them right now. But they have the most rapidly expanding economies in the world. So if we want to sell them, we need a footprint, and it's best to get in by doing good first, and then you can do well later.
So this is very Friedman view of how to do it.
But he used to work for Lilly too. So I just
Yeah. So you can do good things, like noble things like that, because it can gain foothold in a market. You can do it because it takes pressure off of your lobbyists here in the United States who are trying to maybe Trump is trying to lower drug prices right now, right? And if you can point to how, yes, but because of the profits we make, we can do all this great work in these other places, that might help you stave off. So all of those things would be just business reasons for doing it. And in addition, you feel morally good about what you do. So that's fantastic. So I mean, we all want to do good things in the world, and none of us probably want to go bankrupt and broke, but yeah. Okay, so cool. Friedman, though, did set limits on maximizing shareholder value, and I'm going to very thinly discuss that. One is legal things. You can't break the law en route to maximizing shareholder value and have him in your side, right? So suppose a company knows, look, I'm going to do a little bit of hanky-panky. Chances are we won't get caught. If we do get caught, they'll give us a fine, but we're going to make more money than that anyway. And the chance of us being caught is, if we do this 5 times, we get caught 1. You could do a very kind of maximize your shareholder value thinking and break the law and maximize shareholder value. And Friedman would say that is not acceptable. It's illegal, and it's not even what you. So that's a no-no for him. So fraudulent advertising, you can get away with fraudulent advertising maybe because it's not well policed, but that's a no-no. And it's a no-no in part to him, not just because it's illegal, but because it makes markets less efficient. Consumers need to know what they're getting for the market to work well. You shouldn't do monopolistic pricing, even if you can get away with it. If you know antitrust isn't going to catch up with you, you shouldn't do it because that's just antithetical to an efficient market. That's the kind of stuff he did not a big fan of. So again, it all comes down to market efficiency. Yeah, and so this is a great point. Is like, if you could try to make sure to elect people, you could spend your lobbying dollars as a company to get people elected who you know are going to undermine antitrust efforts at the state or federal level, right? And that might be really smart business. It would absolutely be something Milton Friedman was not a fan of, right? Because he really thought that antitrust is something, he's not a fan of the government in general, but when it makes markets more efficient, that's when you need the government, and antitrust is one of those legitimate government activities. Doesn't mean it doesn't get overstepped, that the governments don't get carried away. But yeah, that's absolutely perfect point. Thanks. Okay, there's moral limits too. So let's take advertising. There's fraudulent advertising. I'm saying something that's just blatantly lie. That's against the law, and you're going to get, if you get caught, you're in trouble. But there's also just deceptive advertising, and I do a whole section on this with my undergrad class, and we just throw out all these ads that like technically aren't lies, but it's really obvious that a person casually observing, the ad is going to believe something that's not true. And so it's not illegal, but it's so clearly deceptive and misleading and all that. And Friedman doesn't like that either, because to him, a perfect world involves consumers who are accurately informed about their choices and making free choices about how to spend their money, whether that is worth the money they'd give up to buy something. And if you confuse them or mislead them in an advertisement, you've made markets not work as well, and therefore you're hurting people. And the point of efficient markets is everybody, on average, is better off. I mean, we can talk about that. All right, so those are some of the limits he has. In addition, there's a lot of stuff that's concerning about Friedman's view, and it's so easy. When I started reading on stakeholder theory, I'm like, oh yeah, this is so great because you're thinking about all these other interests. Imagine you are the board of directors of some corporation, and the profits this year weren't all that good. And you want to hold the CEO and the CMO and the everything else accountable for that. And they say, yeah, but we were trying to really take good care of our employees this year. We gave them much better benefits than they used to get. And we lowered our prices because we realized that there were a lot of low-income people who couldn't afford them. And we thought, yeah, why take so much money from our customers? Like, yeah, so you're blaming your low profits on all these other stakeholders. And I don't know whether I can hold you accountable. I don't know if you did a good job running the company or not, because I no longer can tell what you were trying to accomplish. Now, so this is a problem with stakeholder theories. There's one that the stakeholder enthusiasts have ways of like addressing, but not perfectly, right? And so one of the advantages of a Friedman view of the world is you have one job. Within the limits of the law and accepted moral norms, you maximize shareholder value. Boom. And if you don't, we'll find someone who will. That's the okay. Questions on that? Yeah.
It still seems hard from a measurement perspective to really get the long-term view built into that.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, and I don't know how boards run and whether because a lot of boards have incentives to quick stuff too, right? Yeah, I don't honestly know. And I don't know if there are policy levers that could do a better job of that, or if there are mutual fund directors who could have more influence over companies because they care more about long term. So I don't know, but it's a great point. Yeah.
So this is obviously kind of like a moral theory that centers the organization or the business entity as its focal unit for whom good is being promoted, right? I see a lot of skepticism from a consumer perspective if they were to be presented with these value statements. and maybe physicians too, frankly, kind of some of your consumers, if you will, excuse the economist in me, and the actors maybe. That seems like it would create a lot of tension.
There are very few corporate mission statements that say this explicitly, right?
Right. So it's
Yeah.
it's almost like a shadow value system.
I think that's right.
How does that factor into what you think about when you're considering the ethical obligations of these, corporate entities?
Yeah, great question. So if you can't say what you're really valuing out loud, should you value something different, right? I mean, I feel like that's kind of the implicit.
I guess I see this as, maybe you have a different, it's at the crux of any philosophical issue or moral conflict, right? Where you have two different systems of valuing that come into play in the same circumstances. So I guess my question is this something that in your view, businesses and healthcare entities in particular actually follow? Or is it a set of philosophical ideas that promotes economic efficiencies under classical, neoclassical?
I think that most, overgeneralize here, I think most healthcare organizations, many healthcare organizations go further than Milton would even want them to go. They are really pursuing the bottom line. And if they can control the rules of engagement in their industry, if they can get I think most companies strive for not monopoly power. And they don't like, oh, I shouldn't get more power, more market share because Milton will be unhappy. Like, no, he's dead. So I think they go even further than Friedman would want them to. And I think there's mission statements in healthcare, I think, are particularly noble sounding. And I don't know that actions always follow that as well as they should. But let me go in. So let me just accept Friedman for now. And then I want to think about what that means in healthcare. And then I want to say, I think there are different kinds of healthcare organizations. And so how does it, say you really are a well-intentioned person working in healthcare, but you also know that you do have to balance the budget at the minimum by the end of the year and maybe thrive in a competitive environment. And so you're really struggling things. Well, how should you think about Friedman? Well, suppose you're a nonprofit hospital. Friedman's theory was about for-profit shareholder-owned companies, so it doesn't seem like it would apply at all. So already it's like if you're a nonprofit hospital, but you run it and you went to business school and you're like, I'm supposed to maximize shareholder value, like, dude, you don't have shareholders. Just a reminder, you don't have profits. I mean, I think some people call them profit, but you have revenue but no. And in fact, you are specifically tasked to serve community interests. So a t-shirt company, a chair manufacturer haven't been told, oh, serve the general community. No, they're not given tax exemption for doing that either. Nonprofit hospitals are expected to provide, among other things, charitable care to people who can't pay. And yet you're increasingly seeing nonprofit hospitals that are large multi-hospital systems now that their revenue is going up quite dramatically and their charitable care has been flat. And as and in fact, the compensation of the people running those hospitals has to do not at all with how much charitable care they give, but with how many beds they get. And so when they get bigger, they actually get more pay. And so the incentives to the executives are not at all about providing community benefit. They're not rewarded for that, but most are not. And so that's a problem. But anyway, you can't just say you're going to maximize shareholder value. You don't have shareholders, you don't have profits. But you do have to, no margin, no mission. If you lose too much money too long, there are a lot of rural hospitals in this country that are closing right now. And there are really noble institutions that are under great financial threat. There are also large systems that are doing really, really well. And when they talk about our margin isn't great this year, it's look at their compensation and know that when the head of health HCA, the big for-profit hospital thing, that's for-profit, not profit, making $40 million last year. So there's the people running the large hospitals are getting a lot of money. And so it's important that you stay afloat, that you don't go bankrupt. But we have a system now where it's like you first reward the high up people in the organization before you see whether there are other changes you can do to help the community. Okay, let's try another type of healthcare organization, physician-owned clinics. So there's no shareholders. It's like there's 6 orthopods and they own the clinic. They only are accountable to themselves, and they're not tax exempt. But and whatever money they bring in is theirs to keep at the end of the year, and if it's more than they spent out, hurrah for them. And they can do what they can expand. They can give themselves big bonuses, whatever they want. That's their right. Right. So does Friedman apply to them? They don't have shareholders. So what moral constraints what constraints should they face for their maximizing the bottom line? Louder, please. Yeah.
It'd be like the codes of conduct for physicians, like AMA or Hippocratic Oath, those kinds of things would apply.
And I think that's right. I think that there is still a moral duty you have to promote patient interests. And I think one of the big concerns I have with a lot of practices that have sold to private equity is that when private equity buys a dermatology practice, what they'll typically do, they'll bring in more estheticians, services they can charge a lot of money for. They will start bringing in brands of cream and tinctures and lotions to sell to try to get more revenue from that. They start doing more procedures, assume they're indicated. They raise prices. And they raise prices both for the people who are paying fully out of pocket, which I guess that's just a free market. They can decide if it's cosmetic, if they want to pay that amount. But they also raise prices for the things that are covered by insurance companies. And because the private equity often has enough market power because they buy up multiple dermatology practices, they jack up the prices and the insurance companies kind of can't walk away from them. Okay, that's fine. That's just a market. They're competing and payers and them, whatever. Yeah, but increasingly, as I'll talk about tomorrow at medical grand rounds, we're putting a lot of those medical expenses onto patients. They're paying higher out of pocket. And so when I sell my dermatology practice to private equity that then hikes prices, my patients or future patients that come to that practice are going to face steeper out-of-pocket costs. They're going to be harmed. Did you think about that before you sold? I mean, that's the kind of thing I'm not sure that people are really doing. And so I agree. I think the ethics of the profession ought to be setting a limit on that. And I'm not sure that that's happened. And when I have communicated with these organizations that like the professional organizations about this topic, I said, why aren't you giving people guidance? Because I'm sure there's some who want to, maybe let's set a limit on, like, you can't hike prices for the next 5 years if I sell to you. There's something that they don't have guidance to even how to do that. And they said, yeah, our members would freak out if we set any limits on selling to private equity. It's such an important part of their end of career plan right now. So the professional organizations they're member-run organizations, they're lobbying groups for the most part, right? They are not setting ethical guidelines for physicians about this kind of stuff.
Does it only come up when they sell, or is it even in the day-to-day operations? Like you said, they can charge what they want, give them bonuses. Where's that balance? And
yeah, it's not just about selling to private equity. That's right. It's there. You're not selling to private equity. You're just running your own business. You could merge with another couple orthopedic groups yourselves and try to have a more influence on prices. You could. There's certainly a lot of ways you say, I'm going to start linking up with a hospital so we can charge a facility fee for stuff we didn't use to charge. Facility fees are these things where you could have had it done as an outpatient, you would have paid $300, but now you tack on another $500 because it was, quote, in the hospital. And so there are a lot of physician-owned practices that are doing a lot to maximize revenue, and that disturbs me. Yeah. There's a lot that will then say, like, what payer mix you'll have, how many Medicaid patients will you take, you're pointing out. And yes. So, okay, so anyway, the professional ethic ought to be setting some limit on that. And I don't think we, as a profession, are doing a great job of communicating that amongst ourselves and giving people guidance on what to do on the business side of medicine. When I looked at the AMA and they're trying to say, like, what are their business ethics guidelines that are out there? They're mainly things like making sure if you sell your teaching hospital to some for-profit corporation, medical students will still have the same training opportunities, which is super important. But a lot of it is like, not whether you should sell, but when you're going to sell, make sure that students still have a place to practice and train. Make sure that you don't lose professional autonomy. That's a huge emphasis in a lot of the corporate practice of medicine guidelines that the AMA gives. Don't give away your autonomy as a clinician to decide what to do or not to do, which again, I think that's really important. But I can't find anything in the AMA ethics guidance about like, how much profit really should you do? What can you do more? You know, how do you really promote patients' best interests? What sacrifices are you willing to make? So, yeah. Yes.
Mentioned getting clauses in contracts that require you to, do something for 5 years or do something. In your experience, in looking at those types of clauses, are they enforced?
Okay, so I don't know if those clauses even exist. I don't know when people negotiate with private equity, how often they're setting limits on what private equity can do. So I don't know that it's being done. And if it's being done, I certainly haven't looked at whether they're being followed.
Well, for priorly publicly owned hospitals, which is what I know about.
Yeah.
Often there are those clauses when they sell to for-profit entities. A lot of this information predates the whole movement toward private equity.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they weren't enforced.
That's so plausible and it's so disturbing, right? Because I like right now, there's a lot of nonprofit hospitals that are being bought by these for-profit entities, right? And you think, well, why would they do that? They can't make profit. Well, what do? They start selling off the land and the buildings. They kind of take away everything of value out of that. And while the hospital itself isn't running for profit, the owners are profiting. And then by the end, often the hospital is in a terrible situation. And right. So if you've seen that, I mean, that's a so. So I think the M word there is so important, mission, right? Is that we have to, anybody working anywhere within healthcare has to remember what the real mission is here. You're talking about people who are sick and or disabled or facing potential illnesses and disabilities, and you have a chance to turn those around, slow them down, help them out, whatever. And they never wanted to be your customer. Most of what, as I'll talk about maybe later, most of the money that's going to pay for the care they get is not theirs. It's not their own. It's theirs in the sense that it's societal money, that the government pays the vast majority of the bills. And to then, to benefit by selling to an entity that's going to then completely ignore a mission to a community, that is morally highly problematic, right? And how did you not have the strength to resist that, right? It's so hard. And I think so much of it is that, I went to medical school and I saw friends who went to college who couldn't get into medical school, went to business school and made 5 times as much as me. And that kind of irks me. So maybe it's I deserve this. I think there's a mentality that goes in sometimes for folks in these positions. And that okay, let me move on. But thank you for that point. Okay. Physicians, by the way, are doing quite well. And that's something I think we as a profession aren't talking enough about. We all pay a lot of money to go to medical school, or many of us do, and we come out in debt, and then you defer compensation for a long time. So I get all that. Physicians should be well paid. This is not even the top 5 yet, all right? I mean, neurosurgeons should be paid extremely well. And I want people who, they gave up so many years of their life to be trained in that. I don't know how well. And I've been mentoring now I'm mentoring all the neurosurgeons who do non-basic science at Duke. They also have found me somehow. And then they go off And they are all in the 7 figures in the jobs they're getting after they work with me, none of which comes back to me. But anyway, yeah, okay. For-profit clinical organizations, you could say, well, they're for-profit, they have shareholders, so Friedman, they should do whatever Milton tells them to do. We'll come back to that. I think they're much closer to, like, at least it fits like how the corporation's set up, all that. But I'm still concerned. We'll come back to that. And then we'll think about all the, I would call them non-clinical organizations. They're doing things that are relevant to clinical care, right? But they're not directly administering care. They're not physicians and nurses who take oaths that are giving the care. They are selling product. And you'd think like they should maximize profits. If they don't, you're going to get replaced by a CEO who will. But here's why I don't think that really is fair, because, and it gets to what I said earlier, healthcare markets are so incredibly screwed up and unscrew-upable that we should all be more willing to put profit, like to diminish our profit incentive and profit motive and just go back to what the real goal is, which is to help really meet important societal needs. So let me just do a sampling of what this makes healthcare markets so weird. I'll go really quickly, then we'll stop and see what I think. The supply, this is a very econ view of markets, right? The supply side is all messed up, of course, maybe appropriately so, because we limit the supply of how many physicians and nurses that are out there, how many years they have to train, what credentials they need, what licensure things they go through, things like that. And if you train somewhere else, how many of you we let in this country? So we control the supply. And who controls the supply of cardiology fellowships? Cardiologists decide that. And then partly it's based on, like, if we get too many cardiologists, we won't make as much money. I mean, I think. Yeah, I'm too skeptical. Supply of hospital beds is often influenced by communities that say whether they can grow another ICU tower or not. So there's entities that are trying to look at what we ought to have for supply. I don't think those are often super effective. Supply of drugs, of course, is influenced by whether they get FDA approval. We don't just let you sell anything to anybody if it's a drug. As a supplement, yes, we do. But as a drug, we don't. And when we do let you on the market, we give you many years where you have a monopoly. I mean, you literally have a monopoly. And so there's no competition to bring that price down unless it's similar to enough other drugs and right? Why are these limits? Because we think that we can monitor and promote the quality and safety of these things. We want when someone goes to a physician, they should know that they actually met a certain standard of training and ongoing licensure and ongoing education. Doesn't mean they're all going to be great, but it's better than just like somebody who says, I'm a doctor-ish, So we regulate that. Same with drugs. We know when you take a drug into your body, at least somebody has tried very carefully to make sure that that's safe and effective. Patient demand. So that was the supply side. That's just part of the supply side medical. There's the demand side, and that demand will just say patient demand. Often inexperienced decision makers. It's like, I'm pretty good now at deciding, what kind of hot chocolate to buy to stir into my coffee every morning, right? Because I've tried a bunch of different brands, and some are a little more expensive. I decide whether they're worth or not. I'm an expert consumer on that. And by the way, when I made bad choices, I wasn't seriously harmed, right? Often in medical care, you've got a patient with a new diagnosis, let's say, and it's their first time they face something. They're scared, witless, and they have a big decision to make. This is not going to be the most easily informed and rationally guided consumer in the world. Now, there are people who become experts with chronic illnesses on what the options are and what they cost and what's good and what's bad, for sure. But often, many medical situations are not that way. That's why people often rely on their physicians or other clinicians for guidance. They rely on them even when the guidance is not good. I mean, where the physicians have their own biases, don't necessarily know how to best understand what values the patient has so that they can guide them to the decision that best suits what they want. They buy medical care at the margin, right? Because 80 to 90% will be paid by the insurance company. And so, give me something at 10% of its cost, I'm going to buy more of it. Like, oh, that MRI for the shoulder, why wait? I mean, it's only going to cost me, I have a $150 copay. I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's not $3,000, right? So So all these things are, lead to the market being kind of screwy. Pricing problems, trying to figure out the price of medical care, really hard to do. And it's not the result of a free market. It's typically the result of all these very powerful business interests that are controlling prices. And then finally, just a reminder, the vast majority of healthcare dollars in the United States, we are not a socialized healthcare system, but the vast majority of dollars come from the pockets of taxpayers. They do through Medicare, Medicaid, VA, military, things like that. That's what we think of as the part that the government pays. But we subsidize Obamacare insurance. I think we still do that. Is that true this week? Employers get tax breaks for offering health benefits to people, so that's a subsidy too. So every part of the system is subsidized or fully paid for by tax dollars. And it's because we think it's really important to help people pay for medical. We don't think it is important as Germany and UK think it is, right? But we think it's pretty darn important to help most people pay for most of their health care. And so that makes the market very different than a typical consumer market. Healthcare is not a typical consumer good. So I do think if you're working in healthcare, whether you're providing clinical care or whether you're working in an EHR company or a pharmaceutical company or something, think about whether the profits that you're seeking and that you're trying to maximize are really best for society and for patients, and try to be a voice within those organizations to set limits. Try to grow board membership in places that will help those organizations think more about broader interests. And then finally, I'd say, and these are really bad, and so I'm eager in your thoughts. Don't say, oh, I have no choice but to maximize profits. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm a for-profit company. And I'm going to go make sure to send lobbyists in there that find a way to help us get even more profits. I mean, at least you can try to have the rules of engagement be what's good for society. And then within those rules, you could try to maximize profit. But if you're also setting the rules, I think there are moral limits on what kind of things groups should lobby for. And I'm talking about drug companies, American Hospital Association, American Medical Association, American College of Cardiology, et cetera. I think they're too often lobbying for their own interests and not for the interests of society more broadly. All right, so that's where I am in thinking through this topic. Eager for your other thoughts. Yeah, other thoughts? The surgeon over on the side.
It seems to me that your major premise is that healthcare and the delivery of healthcare is not a business or should not be a business, but we're applying business principles to it. Is that an accurate assessment?
It's really great to hear you phrase it that way, because that helps me, think about what I said or didn't say clearly. Their businesses, the question is, they're clearly our businesses, right? I mean, a private solo practice is a business, right? One practitioner practice is a business. A hospital is a business. The question is, what kind of business should it be? What ends should it pursue? And what kind of trade-offs should it have between its own financial bottom line and other things? So I'm saying it's a business that should function differently than most businesses outside of healthcare. You want to push back? Or ask a follow-up?
I mean, that's very thoughtful and logical, and it's hard to disagree with that. But then when you go out in the real world, that's not how it works. And so many of the things that we discuss are competing priorities.
Yeah.
And when you go to the table with the real mission and the moral approach, you're met with someone smiling and nodding and then ignoring you.
Yeah, I agree.
And maybe it's a takeoff of the earlier comment. We're trying to say the quiet part out loud. And, when you're on the service delivery side, we don't actually know, is the mission statement really real? And so there's another level of opacity built in there.
Yeah. So I know I'm not saying that this is how the world works. I'm saying I think that we should start thinking more about this so that it gets closer to working that way. But I remember I gave a talk at a hospital once, and a bunch of the ENT faculty came up to me afterwards and said, yeah, we're about to enter into a new contract in a couple of years. So they want us to drive up revenue so we'll have a higher base to work off of when we get this, risk model, da, da, da. And so they just tell me, like, they're being told, like, you're not doing enough this, and that. And they were super conflicted, but that was the pressure they're under. Like, okay, we need to have moral backbone to push back against that kind of thing. Now, an ENT surgeon maybe has a more ability to push back than relatively new hire at a drug company that tells the marketing department, I don't think we should charge that much for that drug because we make too much money. Your career's not going to go. So I don't know. Other than that, I'd like more people to come out of business school thinking like, oh yeah, healthcare is different. I should be less aggressive at trimming the margin. I don't know.
Now it's on. I understand you spend a lot of time teaching business students, and this feels like whom it's directed at, but we haven't talked much about policy, right? And Milton Friedman probably wouldn't be happy if we did. What's right? Like, because
policy angle is
I feel a little bit like
we can regulate like crazy,
morally strong here. But I don't know if that's a winning strategy.
And this is another thing that companies should be aware of when they pursue profits to with no limits. They're just inviting further and deeper and worse regulation, right? Now we're going to have more regulation. Like, we need to do a much better job. We've done a terrible job of keeping hospitals from getting too much local market share. Our antitrust work has been terrible, right? We have not done a good job of looking at what PBM's business models really are, whether they're passing. There's just all kinds of ways we've failed, right? And I think these are all arguments that Friedman would say, look, fix up the market first. And sometimes regulation is part of it, anti-monopoly, all that. He'd also say we shouldn't have medical licensure because that just limits the supply. We want to open up the supply side, let people be informed about your training, but we shouldn't have licensure. And FDA, he'd probably be against a really aggressive FDA. He'd want to say, like, just give people information about the safety and efficacy of their drugs. Let them decide whether they want to take that. I mean, that's what he would say. But at some point he'd say, the market is so flawed, we do need to step in here because the companies won't do it otherwise. Oh yeah, online question.
Thanks. Really thoughtful, provoking talk. I'm wondering, there has been a couple of points in the conversation where you've said that business leaders might just default to serving the better interests of the shareholders. But I'm wondering what role the shareholders have in looking out for themselves and for society with their investments. I know there are some investment companies that, try to distinguish themselves in the marketplace by being like, quote, ethical investors. Yeah. But there aren't, I don't think, a lot of opportunities right now for investors to weigh in on the ethics of the companies that they might be investing in, other than to invest or disinvest. And most of those decisions are actually handed off to a third party anyway. So maybe some of the obligations should be laid at the foot of like investment banks or mutual funds, who you also held out at one point as maybe offering some opportunity for leverage against unethical business behavior.
I'm going to just take that as a really important comment, and just because I don't know what I can add to that. I think corporate governance is not something I'm an expert on, but I think that is part of what we need to think about is how we're governing corporations, what influence shareholders have to try to promote broader interests than just their own return on investment. And I don't know the easy way to do that, but that's a really important perspective. Are we running out of time?
How about one last question and we'll wrap it up. Go ahead.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on the disparity between like a CEO's salary and your average hospital worker and how that kind of plays into these.
I'm really morally troubled by income, by pay disparities in this country across the broad economy. And, you know, I don't know how you change, this is something that became a norm, that people were embarrassed to be paid too much until somebody was, and they got away with it. And then like, oh, I don't want to be underpaid, because there's a lot of people are very competitive. And so sometimes it's not like, I know you have more than enough money to live off of. Like if you're the best wide receiver in NFL, you're being paid really well. When somebody not as good as you gets paid more, you want a pay hike. And I do think there's a lot of that psychology that drives what goes on. And so I don't know if there's a better way to shame people into accepting more reasonable compensation, or tying that another thing, tying the compensation to the achievement of community benefit rather than just return, you know, the profit status. And then you're doing it for you're having to do the right things to be compensated, but it's egregious.
I'm good.
Yeah. Here comes a mic. Come right around.
Okay, it's not really a question, it's sort of a comment. That's something that I think you ought to consider, is that once it becomes the quote norm, then boards feel an obligation to match it.
Yeah.
And because they don't think they can get the best talent unless they do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much. Super helpful to hear your thoughts and comments.
Thanks so much.